In this lesson, we're talking about the Jazz Age in Arkansas. The Jazz Age is also known as the Roaring Twenties, and sometimes we tend to overlap it with the Gilded Age. It's basically the part of history that begins after World War I and ends with the start of the Great Depression. But it's full of lots of social and cultural changes and legacies that still influence America today. So as we start talking about the culture of the Jazz Age period, I want to bring up first Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican activist and journalist who promoted the Back to Africa movement. His idea was that Africans should be in Africa, including African Americans. So former slaves who had been born here or who had been born from people who were born here, um, basically he felt like blacks should go to Africa, and he promoted that movement. We did actually have some African Americans from Arkansas who did that. He promoted moving to Liberia, and so we did have quite a few people who did that. We'll look at that shortly. But one of the other things that Garvey promoted was the idea for financial independence from a white-dominated society. So he's very much keeping the ideas of white and black very separate. And unlike Du Bois, who was one of the founders of the NAACP, who promoted integration, Garvey very definitely promoted segregation. And he was actually jailed in 1923 for mail fraud for selling stock in Liberia. He was deported to Jamaica, and then he later moved to London. But while that's a bad thing, one of the good things that he did was he encouraged pride and self-worth among African Americans. So his ideas were a little different from the time period as far as what the country was trying to achieve as far as racial integration, but very much important with his ideas in terms of financial independence and encouraging pride and self-worth among a community. So the Back to Africa movement wasn't Garvey's alone. It was actually promoted by the American Colonization Society that arranged transportation and settlement of Liberia. They actually founded the Republic of Liberia in 1847. So there were freed slaves and freed blacks who settled there before the Civil War, about 13,000 who had settled there before the Civil War. Movement declined after the Civil War, but transportation was still available. Anthony L. Stanford, who was a Republican state senator from Phillips County and an African American doctor and Methodist minister, took 23 people to Liberia in 1879 and then 118 the next year. So we did have people from Arkansas going to Liberia. That died out with the split ticket that the Democrats offered. So one of the things that the Democratic Party did in trying to regain control of the government during the Reconstruction period was that they offered split tickets, especially in areas like the Delta, where there was a large African American population. And so these white Democrats would go and say, would go to the Delta and say, hey, we would like for you, as a black candidate, to run with us on our party ticket. So it's not like the ballots then were not like they were today, where we would go in and we might vote for someone on a particular, someone for like county judge or sheriff or something like that. They had this idea that they would go in together as a white person for county judge, a black person for sheriff, a white person for county clerk, and a black person for assessor or collector. The reason for that is that the Democrats very much wanted to show a willingness to work together, and they also wanted to regain power, so it was very important to them to gain the black vote. In the Delta, the black vote was very prominent, so they wanted that vote. But of course, that ended when they got control again in the redemption period. But um, during that redemption period, when the white Democrats do take over again and they kind of diss all of the African Americans across the Delta that they've been working with for a few years, this Liberian exodus begins again. And there were actually 1,500 from Arkansas who applied to move to Liberia in the late 1890s, and some of them moved from Arkansas to Liberia during that time period. There were other things of cultural relevance happening in Arkansas too during this Jazz Age period that we're talking about. There was an automobile maker in Arkansas. It was the Clymer Motor Company, and it was Arkansas's only auto manufacturer. They made cars and trucks for the state's very primitive roads and pavement. So, from the Ozarks to the Delta, the roads were rough. So, these cars were specifically designed for Arkansas roads, and they filed for bankruptcy in 1924. But it was a neat thing. There's an ad here that you can actually see the building and some of the cars that they made too. Also, in this time period, Act 302 in 1913 establishes the State Highway Commission and the State Department of Transportation. So, in 1913, they started building I-30. Not really. I'm joking there. They're still building it. It's taken so long. Anyway, forget that I said that. Just remember that Act 302 of 1913 is when the State Highway Commission and the State Department of Transportation were formed. So, the title of this lesson, remember, was the Jazz Age. So we've got to talk about music, right? Well, we will be talking a little bit about ragtime here. The music. Ragtime was the forerunner of jazz music, and it was considered the pop music of its day back from 1899 to 1917. So, we're talking about music that started along the Mississippi River and the Missouri River and just kind of spread from there. It was very syncopated, and syncopated means that there are several rhythms, kind of this offbeat, irregular beat, and Scott Joplin was the most popular ragtime composer. And guess what, y'all? Scott Joplin grew up in Arkansas. So he was in Texarkana. He was actually born in Texarkana, Texas in 1868, but he grew up in Texarkana, Arkansas, on the right side of the state line. Anyway, he came from a very musical family, and he started a quartet, and he taught mandolin and guitar lessons. That's how he made his money. So, he was a professional musician all along, but at the 1893 World's Fair, there was music that actually started the ragtime craze, and Scott Joplin is just so tied to ragtime, and we'll listen to some of his music in a minute. Scott Joplin was so talented that not only did he teach mandolin and guitar, but when he moved to Missouri, he also taught piano lessons, and it's piano that we generally think of him with when we think of ragtime. And I say we think of ragtime. Maybe you never think of ragtime. I know ragtime. So anyway, hope you'll like ragtime when you listen to it on the next slide. So be sure to listen to those songs on the next slide. The first one is Maple Leaf Rag. That first link that you'll get to on the last slide, Maple Leaf Rag. It was Scott Joplin's first major hit in 1895 that made him some mega money. He had musical success pretty much in everything he tried except opera. That was less successful. He had moved to New York to try opera, and like I said, less success there, but his legacy very much was music known as stride, jazz, big band, and swing, and we've got examples of all of those on the next slide. So be sure to listen to each of those as well.